Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to Thursday, the second last day of class. Are you sad? So sad? That's okay. How did the quiz go yesterday?
Well, you don't have to give it back to me.
I don't have to give it back to you? I'll keep it and treasure it forever.
Yes.
Yes. I'll try and get those marked just as soon as I can. Hopefully tonight. I'm just, again, trying to sort through marking. Good morning. But let's jump back in here. So yesterday we finished off, oh no, I got to say some hi to some people, right? So Zion is here. Good morning, Zion. And Faye is here. Good morning. And Mike is here. Good morning. And Daniel's here. Good morning to you, Daniel. Sala's here. Good morning, Sala. Jack is here. Good morning. Miles is here. Good morning, Miles. Claire is here. Good morning. And Chan is here. Also, good morning. Okay, so we finished off religious oppression yesterday, and we moved on to classism. And we said that classism had to do with kind of systematic inequalities in resources or opportunities between people with different levels of wealth or status or power, right? And we said that people in society can be sort of at a higher level, right? They can be at a higher socioeconomic class, and that can have to do with a bunch of different things or different combinations of things, right? And so we looked at these three. Well, actually, there's four guys on the screen now, but the fourth guy has none of these things.
You have the power to tell all of us.
I have, oh yeah. Yeah, and next to Justin Trudeau and the Dalai Lama, that seems like a lot of power, does it not? Yeah. So we said, Bill Gates here on the far left has a lot of financial power, right? He's a very rich man and he can make things happen that way. The Dalai Lama has kind of social power. People listen to him because he's a respected religious leader. Justin Trudeau has political power, right? We've elected him president. We've elected him Prime Minister of Canada. And well, actually, we haven't done that, but he's become Prime Minister of Canada, and so he has a lot of political power, right? And we said that power was, the most basic definition of it is, the ability of someone to do something or to make something happen that they want when other people don't want the same thing, right? And so I said in this class, we had a quiz yesterday. I was able to make that happen. You all probably didn't want a quiz, but didn't matter because I had the power to do that, right? And so these guys have the power to make things happen as well, in spite of the fact that others may not want the same thing, right? Yes, we said that. So we said that to some degree class is socially constructed, right? And it has to do with what society values and what society's values are. And so I said that, if you look back at thousands of years ago, when you look at hunter-gatherers or even more modern hunter-gatherers, you see that they don't really have social class. Everyone in the group is reasonably equal. And in fact, some cultures strongly discourage any accumulation of wealth anyway. And so we were talking about First Nations people who traditionally live in this part of the world. They had a system whereby if you wanted status and power and respect, you got it not through having a bunch of stuff, but by giving things away. And the more you were able to give away, the more people would respect you, right? To become rich and to have lots of stuff in those cultures would basically get you shunned. Nobody would talk to you. And actually, nobody would share anything with you, and then you wouldn't be able to gain all that stuff anyway. So some cultures have a very strong, they value sharing and they value giving much more than they value having or accumulating. But of course, here in the West, that's not the case. Here, we seem to respect people who have lots of money, right? And so lots of people look up to Elon Musk because he's very successful. And again, in his companies, he has been very successful. But also the fact that he has lots of money is is part of his status, right? It's part of the reason why people kind of think he's cool. And we definitely don't think he's uncool because he has all that money, right? That's definitely not the case. Whereas some cultures would look at someone who has billions of dollars and be like, ugh, gross. Actually, I think that. I think, ugh, gross.
Why?
Well, we can maybe get into this a little bit later, but I wonder what is the good of, I don't mind some people becoming wealthy or rich or successful, but I mean, when someone has that much money, what is the point of that? Like, people like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they couldn't spend that amount of money in 3 lifetimes, right? And so, again, what is the benefit for society as a whole of those guys having quite that much money? Like, just what is the point? What?
They don't have $1 billion. That's their net worth. Like that's their like company like equity. So that's not their money. They don't have $1 billion.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. But they do, yeah, but their net worth is quite a bit greater than mine, right? And in fact, most people have a negative net worth because they're still paying off their house or their cars. And so, yeah, if you haven't paid off your house or your car, you actually have a negative net worth because you owe more than you actually have. But anyway, that's another thing. Yeah, maybe we can talk about that a little bit later as we dig into this. But as I say, social class is kind of constructed, right? So the only reason that people like Elon Musk are have status and power is partly because of economics, but partly because here in the West we respect that. We respect people who have lots of money. The only reason that celebrities have lots of power is because we give it to them, right? The only reason that the Kardashians have any sort of power at all, and probably money, is because people seem to think they're cool and watch their show and buy their products. And Aliana's giving me a look like, what? But I think people do, right? People pay attention to what the Kardashians do and say, and sometimes they buy their products. And I'm not saying I understand that, but I'm saying that that is the case, right? So again, depending on what your culture values, that's kind of what dictates if you have status differences and who winds up as higher or lower status, right? So we said that in part, social classes occur or start to appear when you have agriculture, right? So agriculture has people owning land, some people gaining money and power, and kind of it allows them to put themselves above other people, right? Just to sort of oversimplify that whole process. We said when we moved on to the industrialization period of history, we said that nations that industrialized, like Britain and France and Germany and others, as they industrialize, economic inequality increases, right? So the kind of status and power differences between people grows even more, right? And so some people are able to make lots and lots of money by owning the means of production, by owning factories in which they employ large numbers of people who work for an hourly wage, right? Which is to some degree still how much of society operates, right? And around this time of industrialization, people like Karl Marx here looked at this industrial capitalist system and said, hey, this is kind of exploitive, right? Because the poor people who are doing all the work, they just get paid an hourly wage, and the profits from all of their work, they never see them. They go to the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos people who make all the profit. And is that fair, right? And Karl Marx says, no, it's not fair. And really what should happen is that the proletariat, the people who work in these factories, should overthrow the bourgeoisie. They should overthrow Jeff Bezos, and then the profits of Amazon should be shared equally amongst the people who work there, right? And so I bring this up because you won't really get away from Marx. So if you do a sociology course or a psychology course, or any other kind of critical theory course, you'll bump into Marx because he's everywhere, and he has a way of looking at the world and society that is particular but is useful in some ways. And so you'll always bump into Karl Marx almost wherever you go. And I think I managed to be able to mention him in all 3 of the classes I teach. So he's actually, yeah, I've mentioned him in all high school courses. I've mentioned him in economic anthropology. I don't think I've mentioned him in Anthropology 110. Probably mentioned him in social studies. So I seem to mention him a lot. And he's hard to get away from. He's kind of everywhere. But again, this is what Marx was arguing. He said that these greater economic inequalities were, exploitive and unfair. And really what society needed was a socialist economy where the means of production, the factories, the resources were kind of owned jointly by everyone, and everyone could share equally in the profits. And so he kind of creates this economic system, socialism or communism, and some countries are inspired by that and try to make it a reality. And so in History 12, we just got finished with the Soviet Union, and we know how that turned out. But lots of other countries use this socialist system as a base for their economy, right? So China, of course, is socialist at its base, even though it has bits of capitalism mixed into it, and Vietnam and Cuba and Venezuela and North Korea, all of these use socialism to kind of run their economies. And even if you're not a socialist country, you can still have elements of socialism in them, right? And so here in Canada, we have a market economy. It's not communist, it's not socialist, but we have socialist ideas mixed in. So our healthcare system is a socialist idea. Everybody pays into it with their taxes, and you get what you need when you need to go to the hospital. You don't have to pay money. That's socialism, right? And again, up here in Canada, we're good with it. Lots of Americans get the heebie-jeebies when you say socialism. They don't really, or communism, they don't really like it. But yeah, economic inequality slowly increases throughout history, from hunter-gatherers who are basically economically equal because nobody owns anything, to kind of agriculturalists and farmers where you get a little bit of economic inequality. And that inequality has just been kind of rising as history continues, right? I'm just going to jump through that because that's a little bit too much detail for us. In terms of kind of defining social classes, sometimes it's difficult to clearly define them. And so, if you go back, hundreds or thousands of years, it's very clear. You can figure out, you've got sort of the royalty, right? So you've got the nobles, then you got the poor peasants kind of thing, right? You've got a very simple economic pyramid, if you will. In modern societies, it's often a little bit more difficult, particularly because we have social mobility. So you can move in between economic classes to some degree. And so so if we look here, this is one way of describing class in the US and Canada. We've got the owning class, so the people who have inherited money from their parents. They have trust funds, and they have lots of cash. They don't really have to work if they don't want to. And they have lots of kind of social and political connections, right? Below that, you've got kind of middle class people, people who kind of use their bodies and minds. They sell their time or their intellect for money. Sometimes they have advanced degrees. Sometimes they own homes. They have kids that might go to university, kind of thing. Then we have working class people who are more often using their bodies more so than their minds to earn a living. Often they'll be renters, and they may or may not be able to send their kids to university. They may or may not have the money for that. And then you have people who are kind of poor, right? So they're living, around or at or below the poverty line. And so they may have trouble with unemployment or finding a place to live or paying for a place to live, or just paying for the sort of basic things you need, like food and shelter and clothing, right? And so, again, the divisions between these classes are kind of soft, right? There's no clear distinction between one class and the other. And again, you can, there's some degree of social mobility in the West here. You know, if I suddenly get rich tomorrow, I might be able to move up into the owning class, right? I might never have to work again. I don't know how that would occur, but I'm open to it.
Lottery.
I'm open to it if the money just falls out of the sky into my lap.
You can find a lottery. You never know.
Whoever might hear my plea and feel like they want to answer it, I'm open to. What's that? Oh yeah, but I think if I start soliciting donations, I feel like that's. I don't know if I'm allowed to monetize my channel in that way. I think it's. Yeah, I don't know. Don't send me money. I'm just kidding. So there's kind of soft boundaries between these social classes. Most of these are based on economics for the most part, so just how much money you have and what you're able to do. But they kind of serve as a useful way of describing society and describing social and political and economic inequalities, right? And so, you know, someone like Donald Trump as a kid, he's born into the owning class, right? So he inherited a lot of wealth from his father's business, from his parents. He doesn't really have to get a job if he doesn't want to. He probably could have just sat around for his whole life and just lived off of his money. And not only does he have the power to influence government, he had the power to become government, right? And so he's very clearly in the owning class. Probably most of us, I think, in this room are probably in middle or working class, right? Where we have parents who can sort of pay for our schooling, and our parents probably have professional jobs or government jobs, or you know, some sort of job that earns them a reasonable living, I would assume, right? So we'll come back to this a little bit later, but classism is often held in place by ideology, and really all forms of oppression are, right? So they're maintained, they are allowed to continue to exist based on things that people believe, right? The big ideas that people believe in society. And so, again, we often look up to success, and we often use money as a means of ranking success, right? Or even ranking sort of how smart or good people are, right? And so lots of people looked up to Donald Trump, and maybe still do, because he appeared successful, right? He said he had billions and billions of dollars. He has an apartment, you know, on Fifth Avenue in New York that's on the top of Trump Tower, and the entire thing is plated in gold or something. It's actually horrible to look at, but it's very wealthy looking. And so lots of people looked up to him because of his wealth and because of his apparent success, right? Not a lot of people were really looking at what kind of person is he, right? And actually, we've gotten a little bit of better idea of what kind of person he is, and I won't go into that. But some of the ideologies kind of determine what the social ladder looks like, right? What social inequality looks like, and who actually winds up on the top, right? And so, again, people who are at the top of these economic and social pyramid, they're the dominant group. And again, dominant groups get to define what things are cool and normal and desirable and worthy of respect, right? And so all of these things here, I just threw together some images, are some things about, or things that the upper class are able to afford or have or partake in, and they sort of become things that are cool and desirable, right? Whereas people at the lower end of the economic spectrum often have things that are seen as maybe a little bit less cool. And so people in the sort of dominant group, people at the upper parts of society, will not try to emulate lower parts of society, right? So Elon Musk is not going to go to a country music concert and drink country club malt liquor while taping cardboard onto his Tesla. That's never going to happen, right? But poorer people, people who are at the lower part of the economic spectrum, will try to emulate the rich and famous, right? And Keeping Up with the Kardashians is a perfect example. You're kind of invited into their life to sort of see how, the upper class lives, and maybe even feel like you're participating in it, right? That you're sitting around the table with the Kardashians while they have dinner, right? So you can kind of participate in that world. And again, that shows us the direction of power, right? People who are lower on the economic ladder might want to participate in dinner with the Kardashians, but the Kardashians don't want to participate in dinner with poor people, right? They don't want to watch a show where everyone sits around and eats, macaroni and cheese, in their tiny little kitchen in their rental apartment. The Kardashians aren't interested in that, right? So there's a direction of power going on here. So hopefully this will make sense, because I switch my slides around a little bit to try to get a different flow. So hopefully this will work. So we said that there are kind of, depending on who you ask, there are maybe 4 economic classes in the West here. And people at the bottom are often living around or slightly above or below the poverty line. And we said that the poverty line varies depending on where you are, like what country you're in and what time you're in. But basically, people who are living in poverty basically cannot afford the basic things they need: food and shelter and clothing, right? And so in Canada, Statistics Canada defines it as you're spending more than 70% of your before-tax income on food, clothing, and shelter, which after taxes basically means that that's all you can afford. And so if you live below the poverty line, you can't afford all of those things. You are running out of food, or you're not able to clothe yourself, or you're not able to pay your rent, or all 3 of those things. If you're below the poverty line, that's where you sit, right? And so to kind of talk about this a little bit, I wanted to watch this video here. And it's just a short video talking about income distribution in the United States, actually, but it's reasonably similar. Well, actually, it's not quite the same in Canada. It's not quite this bad in Canada, but it'll talk about what's happening in the US. And so online people, you'll see that I posted the links for a few videos in Microsoft Teams. And so this is just this is the first video. And so I'll just turn online people, I'll just turn you loose to watch it. And then after you finish watching it, we'll come back here, okay? So I'm going to turn you loose to do that, and we'll see you in just a couple minutes. It's very short. Right. So, as you can see, there's a pretty significant difference, right? And so, I think the video points out something that, again, most people knew, right? I think we clearly know that some people have a boatload of money, right? And we've heard, Elon Musk just became the richest guy in the U.S., second richest guy in the U.S., and we kind of knew that, right? We know he has a boatload of money. We know Bezos has money coming out of his ears. I mean, we know these things already, right? But did you think that the situation was quite as bad as the video showed?
Well, I thought like a statistic somewhere that said that like the top richest people in the world, like wealth is equal to like 30% of the like U.S. like wealth.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that pattern is very much the same pattern that you see globally. If you look at the entire world, you'll also see that there are billions of people who have nothing, right? Who have no wealth whatsoever. And then there's a very small, oh, hang on. Oh, I see what was happening. Sorry about that. That better? I just had my sound switch to a different thing. Yeah, so yeah, we clearly intuitively knew that income equality existed, but again, did we think it was quite so bad as it seems to be? And again, the pattern that we see in the United States there is definitely the case globally, where there's billions of people with nothing, right? With literally nothing. And then there are a small group of people that have a ridiculous amount of wealth. And again, I don't want to color your perception too much, but again, is that necessarily good for anyone? Is there a need for someone like, that one guy they showed in the video to have a stack of money so big that he actually needs his own column, while meanwhile 80% of people in the States have 7% of the wealth? Is that good for the country? Is that useful? And there are different answers to that, but it's certainly, here we're talking about social justice. Is that justice? Is it okay for huge numbers of people to not even be able to feed themselves? Like, they cannot feed themselves, or they cannot keep a roof over their head, while someone like Jeff Bezos has more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, even if he was like working really hard to spend everything he could. He still couldn't do it. And so again, is that useful? So yeah, clearly things are highly unequal in the US and in Canada, but how do you think we got to this point of extreme inequality? How do you think we got here?
Yeah, I think like some of like the richest company in the world, like, they don't get paid taxes. For example, like Apple and Amazon, they don't pay taxes. Yeah, like if they pay taxes, they contribute to the economy, like the equality between that.
Okay, so the degree to which they pay taxes is difficult to establish, right? So there have been accusations that these companies don't pay taxes. But the question is that, the taxes of these companies are super complicated, but they have lots of ways to reduce their taxable income, right? And so they have many ways in which they try to pay as little as possible. And again, I don't mean to use Donald Trump as an example of everything, but Trump seems to have been able to go years and years without paying any income tax at all, or the famous $750 amount. And again, is that fair? Because I'm not going to tell you how much I pay in taxes a year, but it's a heck of a lot more than $750. I will tell you that. If it was $750, I'd be giddy. I'd be laughing and rolling around on the floor if all I had to pay was $750. But it is significantly more than that. And so again, is that fair for someone like Donald Trump, who is purportedly a billionaire, to pay $750 in tax over the past, 5 or 10 years or something? Is that what they said? Don't know. Yeah, is that fair, and is that good for society, for that kind of thing to be able to happen? But I think you're right. There are corporations that are able to reduce their tax payments significantly as an incentive for them to grow their business. But again, to what degree is that in the public good, right? To what degree does that help people? Let me show you something else here. So again, 5 causes of growing economic inequality, okay? So this doesn't tell us why we have economic inequality in the first place, because that's a long story, right? That story probably goes back hundreds of years. But these are some of the forces. This video is going to talk about some of the forces that are happening currently, like right now. This is what's allowing that economic inequality to increase, okay? So again, online people, the second video, you'll see a second link in Microsoft Teams. Pardon me. Watch that video, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay? Okay, so actually maybe I'll just put this back on the screen here. So yeah, as you can see, there's a long historical precedent to economic inequality for sure. But there are a lot of forces that are happening either right this very minute or in the past 10 or so years that are contributing to this difference between the richest Americans and the poorer Americans. And of course, because we're living in a globalized economy, all of us are kind of caught in this process, right, in one place or another. And of course, some countries are benefiting, some countries are not, right? And so, or they're benefiting in different ways. And so I think it's easy to look at a place like China, for instance, and say, the last 10 or 15 years have probably been really good for China, right? Lots of people have gained jobs, gained income, their quality of life has increased, they've been participating in the global market, their country has become wealthy and powerful. That's good news for them, right? That's a bit of a success story. But to some degree, I think it is not as much of a success story for the United States. I feel like the United States has more global competition, and as you can see, their people are increasingly struggling, right? A lot of those manufacturing jobs that used to support the middle class, again, they're gone, right? They've gone to China or to Vietnam or to Cambodia or wherever, right? Wherever it's cheaper to manufacture, that's where those jobs have gone, right? And I think that even though the United States remains a rich country, I think it's only rich for some, right? And a lot of people have kind of slid down the economic ladder rather than been able to climb up, right? Even though the United States remains a rich country by any measure. Okay, do you want to take a little bit of a break before we keep going? Okay, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll talk. All right, so we're back. So we were talking a little bit about economic inequality and the fact that both in the United States and in Canada and globally, the gap between the richest and the poorest members of society is increasing, right? I think the statistics and the graphs very clearly demonstrate that. And although we should also say that, globally speaking, because of globalization and sort of increased trade, really many countries have been pulled up, right? And so they mentioned that in the video that there are countries that have been pulled kind of above the poverty line because of global trade. And there's still, a lot of poor people in a lot of poor countries, but on average, there's a saying, what is it? The rising tide raises all boats, right? So as global economic, trade increases, everybody kind of gets pulled up. And so there are countries that were quite poor who are now a little less poor. they're not rich, but they're doing better than they used to be. So, there has been a net positive for a lot of people, but some people have, at the bottom, have come up a little bit, but the gap between the richest and the poorest has continued to increase. And arguably, without any sort of intervention, that will continue to happen, right? And the video pointed out, what was the first one? Technological change, right? So lots and lots of jobs are becoming automated, right? So once upon a time, there was lots of work for people because the only way you could get things done was by people to do them. A great example of this was in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s in offices, they used to have the typing pool. Have you ever heard of the typing pool? Typing pool is basically a room of women, all women, who were basically typing things all day long. And they were copying out documents. And they were doing it because there were no photocopiers or scanners or email or anything like that. So if you needed, if you had a document and you're like, okay, I need 3 copies of this document, the only way you could get 3 copies of it was to take it to the girls in the typing pool, and they would type it out for you 3 times because it was the only way to do it, right? But of course, once photocopiers were invented, you don't need the typing pool anymore. You still need people to type things out because it was still before computers, but you don't need so many people in the typing pool because you can just photocopy it as many times as you need.
Like what if you need a copy of a book?
Yeah, manuscripts got typed out, right? And so if you were writing a book, you would type the entire book out, and then you would send it to your publisher or editor, and the editor would mark it all up, and then they'd give it to someone to type up the new version. And so typing was actually a skill that was taught in school because lots of people, particularly women, would need to learn how to type fast. And so you'd have to type a certain number of words per minute. And the faster and more accurate you were, the more employable you were. But of course, technology has made that basically obsolete, right? You don't have to be, we don't need that many people to type because we photocopy things. And now you don't even need to be a particularly good or accurate typist, right? Because you just make mistakes and you delete it on the screen and it's no big deal, right? What's that? Autocorrect helps you out as well, or spell check after the fact. So you don't really need those skills so much anymore, right? And so that's a job and a set of skills that's basically disappeared because of technology. But every year, there's more and more jobs that can and are done by robots, machines or algorithms or things like that. People don't have to do them anymore. And again, that increases efficiency and it makes our lives easier, but it also, there's certain types of jobs that disappear because machines are doing them. And as I say, the question is, where do those jobs go, right? Are they sort of added on elsewhere? Are there places for people to work or not? And really one of the things you're seeing in America is a lot of the manufacturing jobs that people used to work in factories, again, they've moved overseas. And so people who came out of high school and used to get a job in the same factory that their father worked in, and they would work there for their entire career and make a good living and buy a house and raise kids, that lifestyle is for a lot of people gone, right? And so rather than stay at the same place or go up, they've actually slid down the economic ladder. And so they're in service industry jobs that don't pay as well, that don't have benefits. And so they're struggling. They're not making as much money as their parents did because the economy has changed and it's kind of left them behind. We said globalization is part of it, right? And so lots of places are able to produce goods that are cheaper than domestically manufactured ones. And so if we were sitting here in this classroom in 1940, a lot of the stuff that we would be using and wearing would be made in the US or Canada, right? There was lots more domestic manufacturing. Now, I doubt anything that we are wearing or using, or I doubt anything is made in the US or Canada. It's all made overseas, probably in Southeast Asia or China, right? So again, globalization has meant those jobs have moved away, and it's also made it harder for domestic manufacturers to compete, because here in Canada, we need to pay our workers more. In China, labor is a little cheaper, right? And so we get cheaper goods, but at a price, right? Sorry, I'm just going to jump ahead here. We said there's this rise of the superstars. So some companies have become global and massive, like Apple and Amazon and things like that. And so because they're so big and their profits are so big, the people at the top of that company make substantially more, right? So Tim Cook is the head of Apple now, right? Yeah. Tim Cook. Does it make any sense for Tim Cook to make $200,000 a year?
No.
No, because his company makes billions of dollars a year, right? If you're going to compensate this guy, you have to compensate him at a level of, that makes sense for the company. And when the company's making that much money, he's going to be compensated pretty high as well, right? Failing labor. Fewer people than ever are part of trade unions. And again, if you're in a union, you can advocate for workers' rights and higher pay and better working conditions. But if you don't have a union, you don't have any power, right? And so people who aren't in unions are kind of at the mercy of their employer. The employer has to follow labor laws, but they don't have any leverage, right? They don't have any leverage over their employer. We talked about that in history too, with solidarity, right? And lek walesa. And the last thing is that as some people get more wealthy and more powerful, they're able to use that wealth and power to their advantage, right? They're able to lobby the government for tax policies and other sort of labor policies that benefit them. They're able to kind of send their kids to the best universities, right? And then their kids will kind of perpetuate the cycle, right? They'll stay in the upper class. And so this kind of situation here minimizes or decreases social mobility, okay? And I mentioned social mobility before, and the idea of social mobility is, can you climb the economic and social ladder in your country? If you are born to a poor family, what are the odds that you will eventually become wealthy? And not through the lottery. Like, can you work your way up? Is it possible? It is possible. Okay. Because sometimes people think it is and then it isn't. And this is what the American dream is about, right? The American dream is about social mobility. That you could come to the US as an immigrant or with nothing, and you could work your way up and you could be wildly wealthy, or you could be president of the United States, right? That could happen. That's the American dream. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, it's a bit of a dream because it's not entirely true, but the ideology is that that is possible, right? So societies with greater mobility, greater social mobility, means that even if you're born to a poor family, there's a good chance that you can actually work your way up. Countries with low social mobility means that if you're born in a poor family, the odds of you working your way up the social ladder are low, right? And so Again, depending on the country that you're from and how that country's culture and society and economy work, countries have varying levels of social mobility. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to jump through this because it's too much. I'm going to jump through this because we saw it. I'm going to jump through this because I just defined it. And then I'm going to get to, yes, I'm going to get to this. So this is kind of the last thing that we'll deal with today. One of the issues with social mobility has to do with the people at the bottom, right? So we're not so concerned about people at the top with social mobility because people at the top of society actually tend to stay there, right? It seems like it's more possible for them to fall down, but more often than not, they don't. The problem is, how do you get people who are at the bottom to be able to climb the social ladder, especially when they might be intelligent, talented people who just, by no fault of their own, they were born into a family with no money or no resources, right? How do we allow them to climb the social ladder? Because that's good for society, right? If you have a child who is born into a family and they are wildly intelligent and talented and really could benefit society and contribute to society, it's in society's best interest to allow them to climb the ladder, right? To go to a good school, to go to a good university, to get into a good company or to start a business. That's in society's best interest, right? So how do we allow that to happen? And again, it's an issue because people who are at the bottom of society, even though they might be very intelligent, very talented, very able people, they don't have the resources, they may wind up stuck, right? They may wind up stuck in the bottom levels of society. And again, that's not good for them, but it's not good for society either, right? We want to allow our best and brightest to rise to the top and make a contribution. That's good, right? And so the video I want to watch now has to do with that very question. So people in poverty, why are they there, right? So why are there people who cannot pay their basic bills, right? Who cannot afford shelter or food or clothing? Why are those people there? And what can we do to get them out of that, right? What can we do to sort of allow people to rise up the social ladder? Because unfortunately, often people who are in poverty aren't able to overcome it, right? If you can't feed yourself or afford a roof over your head or afford any kind of clothing, it's hard to do anything else, right? How are you going to go to university or even college or even just get a certificate in something to help you in your job? You don't have the time or the money for that, and people will often become stuck in this level. So how do we get them out? And Rutger Bregman here has an interesting idea that maybe we can talk about, okay? So again, online people, I'll turn you loose. This is the third video on Microsoft Teams. And so we'll watch it and then we'll come back and talk about it, but we'll only have a minute or two when we come back. But go watch this video, the third one in the list, and then we'll see you when it's over, okay? I should be?
Yeah, you should be like,
I don't know if I have any great ideas like Rutger Bregman here.
you have to register for it, and then let you like go there and talk.
Yeah? What do you think I should talk about?
I don't know, like social justice.
Yeah, but I'm not the creator of anything social justice. I just communicate it to you and teach it to you. I don't generate any ideas of my own. I just pass the message on. Yeah, so kind of interesting, right? And so we see here that, how do you get people to move up the economic ladder? And quite frequently we take a very individualistic, meritocracy type view of poverty, right? If we see people who are poor or who are struggling, well, it must be their own fault, right? Like, get a job, man, right? Or, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which I don't understand that expression either, but it's an expression. If you're not succeeding, if you're not making enough money to pay for food and clothing and shelter, well, then work harder, right? Like, what are you doing? Like, suck it up and get moving, right? That's often the sort of way in which we look at people in poverty, right? When they're there, it's their fault. And if only they worked harder, then they would get out of poverty, right? Obviously, if they're there, they must want to be there because they're just lazy, right? Or whatever. So we kind of attribute these sort of personality or character ideas to the fact that they're there, when in fact, just like systemic racism or systemic sexism, there's a systemic inequality in society, and it makes it difficult for people to rise above it. And so Rutger's first point there is that that study that they did in India, where they did an IQ test on sugarcane farmers prior to the harvest and after the harvest. And so basically at one time of the year they're poor, and another time of the year they're rich, right? And yeah, people's brains operate differently when they're under conditions where there's not enough, right? When they feel that they're going to go without, and whether it's food or money or whatever it is, people make different kinds of decisions. And that's not really a mystery. That's something that psychologists have easily been able to demonstrate, is that we're not very good at long-term thinking as human beings anyway. We're much better at short-term thinking. But definitely when we are in a situation where there is scarcity, right? Whether it's money or resources or food, we start to act differently. We start to make different decisions. And so Rutger is saying, yeah, this is the problem, is that when you have a group of people who do not have enough resources, they start to make different choices, right? Their brains start to work a little bit differently. And sometimes they make bad choices because they just don't have enough to sort of, how should I say this properly?
To make their brain work.
Yeah, the context is important, right? And again, we're all very aware of that, I think, right? If you come in here and you don't sleep the night before, is your brain working properly? No, right? If while you were doing an exam, if I walked around and like blew an air horn behind you all the time, would you be able to focus and do well in the exam? No, right? It would disrupt your thinking, and you'd be like, oh God, what's this horn? So I'm trying to be funny here, but again, our thinking does not always happen the same, right? Because external and internal factors have a great deal to do with how our brain is operating and our ability to kind of make good choices. And so Rutger says here, the fact that some people don't even have enough to eat or to live anywhere or to sort of clothe themselves has an effect on how they think and how they behave. And it makes it more difficult for them to get out of poverty, right? And so he suggests, what's the solution?
Like take 1% of the GDP and then fix the poverty.
Yeah, fix the poverty by guaranteeing a basic income, right? And so the idea is you figure out kind of where the poverty line is. Let's say it's $20,000 a year, let's say, in Canada. you basically pay everyone $20,000. You ensure everyone gets $20,000 a year no matter what, right? And so for people who already make more, I make more than that. I don't mind saying that because that's reasonable. I wouldn't get any money, right? So it would be deducted off my income tax and I wouldn't get anything. But people who are unemployed or homeless or struggling, they'd get 20 grand a year. No questions asked, no strings, everybody gets it, right? And that can help them to lift themselves out of poverty and to be able to, make decisions and do the kind of things that will allow them to climb up, right? It's a path out. But without that guaranteed basic income, you're stuck, right? And Rutger points out here that one of the things that holds people back is the money, right? So they see a $175 billion price tag and they say, holy cow, where's that money going to come from? That's a lot of money just to hand over. But of course he points out that there's actually a cost to doing nothing as well, right? If you don't do anything, the cost is not zero, right? The cost is actually 500 billion because you have to provide all kinds of other community supports and maybe foster care for kids, or maybe people in poverty commit more crimes and so you have to pay for more police and more jails and more this and that. And there's a huge cost to having people live in poverty, and not only an economic cost but a human cost, right? What could all those people be doing for themselves and for society that they're not doing because they can't feed themselves, right? And he's saying we can afford to do this, right? We have the money to do this. What's stopping us? Why are we not doing it? And why do you think that is? Why do you think that the US hasn't just done this already?
Like maybe some working people like, would object that, like they have worked for their money and they don't want to like deduct their income just to help like lazy people.
Right. So there's a lot of kind of cultural values and ideology behind this, right? You have to work for a living, right? You have to earn your, there's individualism, right? You have to earn your own way, right? And so some people might object to the fact that, I work a full-time job to be able to pay for what I need. Why should some guy like sit on the couch and, just get money from the government? Is that fair to me? Right? And what's that? Yeah, maybe I'll just sit on the couch all day and collect my government checks and, just watch Netflix or something, right? Which is the fear, right? That's the fear that's what will happen, is that people will just quit their jobs and sit around and wait for their government checks to roll in. But again, we see that in that experiment in Dauphin, Manitoba, in Dauphin that didn't happen, right? They tried this in the town and people didn't quit their jobs, right? People continued to go to work and do what they were supposed to do and earn a living, right? But what were the benefits, right? Educational performance increased, hospitalizations went down, domestic abuse went down. There were clear social benefits to just making sure that everyone had a safety net, right? That if you fell below 20,000 a year, the government would top you back up, right? And again, that sort of eliminates this scarcity mindset. It allows people the ability to make good choices, and it allows them to climb their way out of poverty. And again, if you're not making enough to sort of feed and clothe and keep a roof over your head, it's kind of hard to do anything else, right? It's hard to get your high school diploma. It's hard to go to college on the weekend and, maybe work toward a certification or a degree. It's really hard to do any of those things because you have neither the time nor the money, right? And so Rutger says this is a very simple idea, but again, there are cultural and ideological blocks to it, right? And this is the last thing I'll say because we're out of time. And it's a very socialist idea, right? This is the sort of thing that Karl Marx would approve of, right? Making sure everybody shares.
Hello, Columbia College. Happy
Okay.
Thursday.
That's it. I'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll pick this up, okay? So bye.